You know, my life has been pretty great ever since I broke that witch's curse. Of all the movies I had to watch for this project, Snow White was the one I was least looking forward to. It's a really slow boil, running for about 80 minutes, but containing only 20 minutes of actual content. It's so incredibly nothing. I'm surprised at how little actually happens in it and how much the film is padded with, I'm not gonna say musical numbers, more like tediously dragged out songs. Maybe Disney didn't want to add too much of a plot since the 1938 audience would have seen drawings moving on a big screen and start panicking because they thought it was the symbol of the end times. I wouldn't say Snow White is aged poorly, as that would imply that it was ever actually any good. Snow White birthed many terrible Disney trends that took almost 100 years to shake off, and contains probably the second creepiest introduction for a love interest ever. Why does this story even end with a romance anyway? These two have like no chemistry. The romance is just shoehorned in for the sake of having it. Maybe Disney should have spent less time pushing a heterosexual agenda and more time writing a story. I'm joking, but if the prince was a princess, there would be about 150 YouTubers making the exact same argument with total sincerity. What this movie really needs is gay princesses. Does anybody actually fondly remember Pinocchio? Because I don't have much to say about it that I didn't already say about Snow White. It's a lot of fluff padding with very little story, and the whole lesson about staying on the straight and narrow is so outrageously vague. I was trying to make the Disney Project roundups longer since there were fewer of them, but I just don't have anything to say about it. Oh yeah, the way they portrayed the Romani puppeteer is... yikes. How about next time, instead of the racist caricature, you add some gay princesses? Dumbo is a movie about a cute elephant babu, and that's about it. I like the cute elephant babu, but I'd be lying if I said the movie was about anything else. Dumbo's ultimate goal isn't anything big, he just wants snuggles from his mama. What I do find interesting is that this is the absolute nadir of Disney's old school obsession with musical numbers. I get the feeling that Walt never got over the fact that Fantasia was something of a flop that almost bankrupted the company, and was trying for the longest time to fit Fantasia-esque moments into all of his other movies. And dear lord, the crows. I always knew the crows were racist caricatures, but holy shit, seeing them in person for the first time just... oh lord, that's uncomfortable. The leader of the crows is named Jim. Jim Crow. You know, Disney was long rumored to have been a Nazi sympathizer, and watching most of his older movies, I'm starting to see exactly why people got that impression. These old Disney movies go beyond the casual racism of the age and into some pretty horrible depictions of non-white people. So it's not a baseless accusation made against Walt. These movies are pretty fucked up. How about you edit out the racism and edit in something better? Like gay princesses. The deer dies and that's literally all you fucking care about. For real, prove me wrong in the comments. What is one scene you remember from Bambi that isn't the death of Bambi's mother? The death of Bambi's mother isn't even all that impressive. It's been held up as some horrible moment of scary Disney movies for so long that its reputation has far outweighed what it actually deserved. Everyone gets over it pretty quickly, not helped by the story time jumping away. Maybe we could tell a story about young grief? No, prancing deer. Given how soulless the rest of the movie is and how quickly everyone forgets it, it almost feels like the death scene was added in specifically to give people something to remember. The whole Bambi's mom thing is meant to show that man is the greatest evil in the world. And many people have pretentiously echoed that sentiment, but it's not man that kills Bambi's mother. It's sport hunters. Sport hunters are some of the biggest losers in the world. We're always mocking what sniveling little cowards they are. Hell, they're the villain in Beauty and the Beast. If Bambi's mom happened today, it'd be considered an echo to Cecil the lion. In fact, it might not even be a sport hunter. It could just be a poor, hungry, ordinary person trying desperately to fill her cooking pot. A lot of people just forget everything else that happens in the film because it's a lot of prancing around and generally waffling. The only scenes that can arguably called a story are Bambi standing up, the meadow, the death scene, and the fire. And that's not a lot for an hour-long movie, and much of it amounts to very little. It's the same problem that every other early Disney movie has. Walt really likes waffling around and really doesn't like telling stories. This is the problem with overhyping older movies based on a scene that doesn't age well, and we really need to stop doing it. Maybe next time, just add some gay princesses. You know, I think this might be my favorite of the old pre-Little Mermaid Disney movies. It's certainly aged quite well compared to the others surrounding it, like a fine wine surrounded by month-old cheese. There's been a lot of claims that Cinderella is the epitome with everything wrong with old school Disney, and that Cinderella is just sitting around and waiting for her happily ever after to come get her. But honestly, that's such a bad read of not just the film, but the very concept of storytelling. First of all, Cinderella's not just waiting around, she's suffering some pretty horrible abuse at the hands of her stepmother. She ultimately doesn't even want a happily ever after, she just wants one nice night for herself, to which her friends decide to help her get because she works her ass off. She deserves it. It's the king who engineered the whole thing because his son was just so disinterested in getting married. Yeah, the fairy godmother magically undoing Lady Tremane's bullshit might seem weird, but the movie is really dead set on showing how petty and controlling Tremaine actually is. So this is just another instance of that, and the fairy godmother is quite literally karma acting on both her and Cinderella. One sticking point I do have though is that I don't think Lady Tremaine is scary. And when I say that, people get confused because I had an abusive mother when I was a kid who pretty much behaved rather similar to Tremaine, but I was in that small percentage of abused kids who became teenagers and just accepted the fact that my parents were gonna try and hurt me regardless of what I do, so I started fighting back and butting heads with them and challenging them a lot. My parents' abuse tactics were forced to change because if they got as physical and vindictive with me as Tremaine did, they were not gonna come out of that without a bloody nose or two.
Keep away from me.
You're not allowed to do magic outside school.
Yeah? Try me.
And once you do that, once you start damning the consequences and fighting back against an abuser, you start to see just how childish, poorly adjusted, and poorly raised they are. You start to see them for exactly the kind of person they would have to be to think this is acceptable behavior. Their yelling turns from a terrifying harbinger of doom and into eye-rolling contempt at their latest petulant tantrum. So I find Tremaine annoyingly irritating rather than just scary, but I don't mean that as a criticism. In fact, that makes me like Lady Tremaine more as a villain because I see how petty, cowardly, and spiteful she is. The things she does just to spite and hurt Cinderella are so childish that it's hard to be scared of her, and that's actually what made me like her more in my adulthood. It's funny seeing people look at moments of simple altruism and declare it unrealistic, since in real life your fate can live or die on whether or not you make a good first impression to the right people, especially in the age of GoFundMe where everyone gets to be the fairy godmother. And that's kinda the point. If I could humble brag for a minute, a few months ago someone came to me asking about signal boosting a GoFundMe for a friend who was suffering an abusive mother of her own and needed to get money for a long distance bus ticket to get out of the state and go stay with her girlfriend. When he told me the amount was $115, I told him not to bother with GoFundMe and just give me her PayPal address and I'd give her the money myself. That's something your pop progressive hot take misses. You don't need a magical fairy godmother or superhero to help you out of a bad situation. What you need is someone, anyone, with a pair of eyes, a voice, and 10 cents worth of compassion. It says something about you that you think compassion is unrealistic. But I'll tell you what does bother me, and what honestly just ruins the entire movie, is that the fairy godmother explicitly tells Cinderella to be gay, and then she doesn't do that. Like, come on, Cinderella, you had one job. This is a terrible plot hole, Disney. Do it again, but with gay princesses. This movie is a trip. And I don't just mean because it's full of nonsense. We all know by now that Alice in Wonderland is the acid trip to end all acid trips. But what really sells the whole thing is Alice herself. She's just so deadpan and reserved about everything that she turns around into the best thing in the entire movie. Where most acid trip movies fail is that they try and use the viewer as a gauge for how nuts everything is getting. But Alice in Wonderland keeps Alice around to be just weirded out enough by everything going on around her that you really get a feel for just how fucking bizarre the entire world is. There's a lot of charm in this movie that I wasn't expecting because I'm just so used to old Disney movies relying so hard on the novelty of there being pictures moving to carry them. Alice in Wonderland has a lot of breathing room in between its really big set pieces to let you get settled and let Alice do what Alice does best and snark all over Wonderland. There's this one point toward the middle of the movie where Alice is crying because she's lost and can't find her way home and starts singing about how she just can't seem to follow her own advice and keeps wandering off, chasing the next thing that catches her eye. It's a really sad moment because she's just a little girl and yet she's gotten so in over her head because she just can't focus on what she's supposed to be doing. I felt more genuine sadness here than I did in Bambi, which yanked so hard on the heartstrings it accidentally tore them out so I couldn't feel feelings anymore. Despite being seemingly all over the place, Alice in Wonderland is a surprisingly grounded and small-scale movie, a lot more charming and genuinely heartwarming than Bambi could have ever hoped to be. Unfortunately, like every Disney movie, it's severely brought down by the total lack of gay princesses. Disney movies and racism have historically gone together like bronies and child sex trafficking, but honestly, Peter Pan is just trying to see what he can get away with. Almost the entire first half of the film is taken up by an extended series of racist jokes that culminate in an extended musical number of... oh, dear fucking lord. You know, for a lot of these more problematic movies, I've been going back to watch Doug Walker's Disney-cember series on each of these movies, and there's a trend where something so absurdly racist that it gets criticism decades later comes on screen, and Doug goes, "I didn't think it was that bad. I thought it was cool." And just And that really encapsulates everything wrong with this bearded hack. What Made the Red Man Red is still a song that makes me angry every time I hear it, and I'm still to this day furious that Josh had the gall to put it at the end of that one video we did together. I bet if he had Sketchy on, he would be seriously considering how to sneak an N-word into the video. But enough talking about sad little boys who don't want to grow up, let's talk about Peter Pan. Peter Pan is an okay movie. It was never anything groundbreaking and just kind of sailed along. It was the Wreck-It Ralph of its day. Peter himself is a perpetually adolescent child with a really big bug up his ass about women, and most of the story perpetually involves him getting the shit kicked out of him for it. Honestly though, Tinkerbell's the really weird part of the movie. I'd seen this movie when I was a kid, but it only just occurred to me how aggressively sexualized she is. I've seen female characters be treated like window dressing, but Tinkerbell is just the most. It's kind of creepy. I know I've said this a dozen times already, but Walt, what's wrong with you? I mean, I know you can't answer me because you're dead, but what's wrong with you? Speaking of which, I knew the movie had a really racist segment in it regarding the native tribe, but okay, usually Disney racism can be powered through because it's only a small piece of the film, but this takes up almost half the movie. Between everyone chanting, "We're off to fight the Injuns," and the constant racist remarks being made the whole way, to Captain Hook saying "Redskin," and then the musical number that implies native people are red because they're perpetually blushing and insisting that it's true no matter what is written or said, and I just... Walt, what's wrong with you? I've said this twice in one roundup. Just what's wrong with you? The amount of racism in Disney movies is almost comical in its absurdity, and it baffles me how extreme it gets sometimes. There are times where Disney movies feel like they were actually made by the mutant offspring of H.P. Lovecraft and Rebecca Sugar, and people always come back at me with, "But he was a product of his time." But even back then, there were rumors of him being a Nazi sympathizer. Peter Pan desperately needs a re-edit, one that takes out all the dumb shit with the natives and replaces it with, I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, gay princesses? This is another movie that hasn't aged well, but in a different way. Back then, a tramp was another word for a hobo, and these days a tramp is, well, me. While I absolutely love Lady and the Tramp, for some reason I can't watch more than 20 minutes of it at a time. This was the longest in a minute to write, and it threw my entire schedule out of sync as a result. Maybe it's the result of the almost episodic way the movie's written, but I think it has more to do with the really soft way the line delivery is made, along with how everything moves just a bit too slowly, and it just kind of lulls you to sleep. I've been getting that feeling with a lot of older Disney movies, even the ones that are actually pretty good, in that you kind of get lulled into a hypnotic state while watching it. Maybe that's why they're so overwhelmingly praised despite just being kind of boring. It's kind of like watching Peppa Pig compilations for hours, you know, assuming nobody's spliced that mutant offspring of Slender Man and overly attached girlfriend into it like a prick. That having been said, I do really like this movie. It's got the cute puppers in it. What's not to love? The only thing that could possibly make it more fun is gay princesses. Oh my god, this movie's so fucking boring. Sleeping Beauty is the absolute nadir of old school Disney. It's slow, it's hypnotic, it's dull. Every character is a dull cardboard cutout, and more time is spent making really long dramatic shots than doing anything entertaining. It feels like a Fantasia piece where the music was given more importance than the actual story. In fact, the story is so watered down and scrubbed clean from its original fairy tale, you wonder why Walt even bothered trying with this one. There's an irony with Sleeping Beauty in that every time Disney has revisited it, it turned out to be better than the original animated film. The film's appearance in Birth by Sleep was dramatically improved with the addition of Blueberry Lesbian doing all the heavy lifting for Prince Philip because he's a weak-ass trubbish shit, and the live-action remake Maleficent completely rewrote the entire story to have more badass mom energy and turning the curse scene from a dull affair into the most satisfying series of vindictive grins ever put on screen. I love this movie. It's trash, but it's my trash. The animated version is even more trash, but not nearly as fun or satisfying. While Maleficent herself is often considered the highlight of the entire film, that's only because everyone else is so dull and bland that she's the only thing that really stands out. She only has maybe one or two really good scenes, and beyond that, she really does just blend into the scenery. We're still in that era of Disney where the movie doesn't have to be good, it just has to be pretty, and it's usually the non-fairy tale movies that tend to do better because they have to have some semblance of a story involved. It's strange how in the modern era this has reversed itself, where the Disney princess movies are the really strong films while the non-princess films are more throwaway and less enjoyable. You know, except Zootopia. I don't know. Sleeping Beauty needed something more engaging to really liven up the place. Like gay princesses. 101 Dalmatians is kinda boring. This is the start of the Xerox era of Disney where all the animation was done via photocopier, and it wasn't just the animation that changed. A lot of these movies have a really whispery sort of line reading where everything just sounds soft and dulled out, which really makes a lot of the movies a snorefest to watch. This is something about the Xerox era I find a lot of people don't talk about. The sound design makes these movies harder to watch than the animation ever would. I actually think the Xerox animation looks fine. It's like an old storybook came to life, and it's a pretty cool effect. I tend to be in the minority in that really impressive animation isn't isn't my priority with animated films. It's the writing. The writing was what killed 2D animation in recent years after all, but 101 Dalmatians is just kind of a slog. The movie itself has too slow of a pacing, and it takes a lot for anything particularly interesting to happen. And the previously mentioned sound design means that even otherwise critical scenes tend to be drab and dull as everyone whispers their lines like they're trying not to wake their parents. And that's a shame because a lot of these moments are really good, but they require a rewind almost every time because they're such a chore to listen to. Weirdly enough, despite the majority of the film being really tedious and boring, the last third where Pongo and Perdita are bringing their puppies home is genuinely some of the most tense and enjoyable filmmaking I've seen so far. From hiking in the blizzard to taking refuge through the night to the stealth mission in town to the chase at the end, it all had me on the edge of my seat, and I don't usually get that excited for anything except gay princesses. Okay, I'm at a loss for words because this movie is legit puzzling. It doesn't really have a story. Merlin starts educating a young boy for most of the movie and then accidentally becomes king within the last 5 minutes like it's no big deal. Like, this movie's so much nothing. A lot of Disney movies amount to nothing, but they usually at least have something resembling a plot and a climax. This one just stops, and I'm a little fascinated how this movie came to be made. Merlin's funny, but you can't really base an entire movie around that one idea. It's a nothing plot and furries. I don't get it. Like, Walt, this movie's a dud. It really needs a life-saving injection of gay princesses. Okay, I'll level with you. I didn't finish The Jungle Book. I got 20 minutes into the movie and I had only 3 jokes written and I decided I just couldn't be bothered finishing it. I don't know what it was about the movie that made me so criminally bored, but I couldn't stand watching another minute. Something gay princesses. This whole movie is about one alley cat trying to get laid and become a stepfather. The Aristocats is aged weirdly. The film has the worst of the worst when it comes to Disney racism. Every single one of the alley cat gang is a racial stereotype, but special mention goes to the one cat with squinty eyes, buck teeth, an English accent, and can't string sentences together. They even had him play the Oriental riff on a piano with a pair of chopsticks just to really hammer it home. Here's the thing that bothers me about Disney racism, aside from the fact that it's racism. People are always trying to excuse Disney's racist crap by saying, oh, it was a different time. Standards were different back then. But the thing is, that only really applies to nomenclature. Depending on the time period, it's not uncommon to hear some of the lesser racial slurs being used, but the kind of depictions that occur in a lot of Disney films, and this one in particular, only happens when you have a particularly nasty kind of malice that can exist regardless of the time period it came from. A lot of people from that time were racist simply because racism was normalized, but it took a particular kind of racism to do something like a minstrel show or protest interracial marriage, an antagonistic kind of racism, the MAGA kind of racism. And Disney very much falls into that category because there is nothing about their depictions that isn't completely and 100% deliberate, because no amount of passive racism is gonna get you this far. This is why I reject the notion that I have to judge it based on the time in which it was released, because this kind of shit was antagonistic even by the standards of its time. Anyway, moving on to what has arguably aged the best, I was honestly surprised by Thomas O'Malley. Usually male leads in Disney films are either bland or blatantly horrible, because the idea that male leads don't have to be entitled, selfish, low-key misogynistic jackasses is actually a relatively new thing, as in within the last decade or so, and only 2 characters ever really fit that role. Well, now it's 3, because honestly, O'Malley fits into that same mold. In fact, you know who he most reminds me of? Eugene in the first season of the Tangled cartoon, where he was really understanding about Rapunzel's refusal of his proposal, had no hang-ups about Rapunzel's ability to take care of herself, and even chided the king himself over it.
Eugene, please, take care of Rapunzel.
We are gonna get you out of here. Besides, you should know by now, Rapunzel doesn't need anyone to take care of her.
And was just overall the most supportive, understanding kind of person around. And that's the same kind of vibe I get from O'Malley. While he starts the movie trying to flirt with Duchess, who honestly flirts back even harder, almost instantly he switches to caring only about her well-being over himself, and it's just nice. I know it's kind of a bare minimum standard for these kind of characters, but I'm just gonna appreciate that this managed to happen in the 70s of all things. I know Lady and the Tramp kind of went that way too, but Tramp only really turned around in the last bit of the movie, while O'Malley is like that almost immediately after he's introduced. Everything else in the movie is usually centered on the relationship between Duchess, her kids, and O'Malley, and it's a miracle that O'Malley came out as well as he did. I'm in 2 minds on this movie because on the one hand it has some of the worst racism I've ever seen in Disney, but on the other hand O'Malley himself has aged surprisingly well. Then again, maybe there's something else problematic about this movie that I'm missing because I'm still dealing with the whole sheltered in rural Canada thing, and someone else will point it out to me in the comments and I'll kick myself for not noticing. I mean, personal growth and further enlightening is almost as good as gay princesses. I was genuinely surprised by Robin Hood. I expected it to be the usual snore fest a lot of these movies are, but it was a genuinely funny and enjoyable movie, which is ironic considering it's about a rich oligarch choking the life out of the general public with crippling taxes. This is the fun part of reviewing movies by today's standards rather than the standards of when they came out, because this film came out just before Reagan gutted the American economy to heavily favor the rich more than it already had done, so the idea of a greedy baron as the villain who just wants gold, gold, gold was seen as quaint back in the 70s, and still is by people who live in their own fantasy land. But today, when Amazon employees are living off food stamps while their CEO is sitting on almost $200 billion, I'm not the first person to point out that the lol so greedy corporate villain from a lot of movies isn't exactly the cartoon caricature people like to imagine they are. That's actually how corporate executives work. And in Robin Hood, it gets more in the nose, because just like in the movie, when the rich are encountered with anything that might make them go from extremely rich to ever so slightly less extremely rich, they go, In the first third of the movie, there's an extended scene where a bunch of children sneak into Prince John's castle, only for Maid Marian and I don't remember who the chicken's name is, to welcome them in and act out the overthrow of Prince John. Aside from the fact that it's beautifully relevant these days to hear a child scream death to tyrants, especially since these days that has somehow become a contentious topic, the whole sequence is probably the most adorable thing I've ever seen in a Disney movie. Seriously, that kid's going places. Also, the brawl after the archery tournament remains one of the single funniest things I've ever seen in one of these movies. The slapstick to the quipping to the football homage out of fucking nowhere, it's just a good time. And after spending so long having to slog through so much horrible shit out of professional obligations, I am all about having a good time. Robin Hood is a great film. It's aged beautifully, and it stands out against an ocean of centrist live and let die complacency. Only thing that can make it truly perfect is gay princesses. Oh boy, this month was kind of We're getting close to a series of movies that are hard to talk about. The Jungle Book was one and The Rescuers is another. I didn't even make it in a minute about The Rescuers, and it's for the simple fact that the sheer amount of child abuse in this movie wasn't something I could make a joke about. It made me physically uncomfortable. The Rescuers is a beautiful movie and a very well written movie, but it's not something that can or should be joked about. I don't want to talk about this movie, to be honest. It's good, but it makes me very uncomfortable, and I really don't want to watch it again. Not even if it had gay princesses. Good lord, this movie's shit. The Fox and the Hound is remembered as this sad movie about a pair of best friends who are driven apart by society, but that friendship only lasts for about 2 days before Copper gets put on a bus and comes back an old and hardened hunting dog. It's probably the least emotionally gripping friendship ever put on screen, and the fact that the movie treats it like they've been close friends forever is laughable. And that's ironic because there's a much more emotionally compelling relationship between Todd and his human caretaker, who raised him since he was a baby. There's actually a scene where she has to drop him off at a game preserve to keep him safe from Mr. Republican, and it's really sad because she's saying goodbye to someone she raised for years, and I'm baffled as to why as soon as it's over, we get back to the supposed tragedy of Todd and Copper's barely existent friendship. I know they imply there was a big time skip, but the point where Copper goes off hunting is when he's still just a little pupper, and the final act is stretched on extremely long. I just don't care. I can't be fucking bothered with this movie because it already showed me what the movie actually was. Ironically, if you stop The Fox and the Hound after they first meet, then watch all of The Fox and the Hound 2, and then continue Fox and the Hound afterward, their friendship actually has a lot more going for it. I know some people look at that movie and go, it misses the point of the original, but honestly, I think it just reinforces it.
I ever forget that again, you just kick me on my walking away. Shake on it. Shake on it.
We're still friends, aren't we? Todd, those days are over.
The whole point of The Fox and the Hound is that society is going to tear their friendship apart. Is an additional movie entirely about that friendship really a bad thing? I think the reason a lot of people have a bug up their ass about the sequel is because Lindsay Ellis told them to have a bug up their ass about it, but also because it doesn't carry the same moody tone since it's a movie about baboos being fringe. But that's the point of a midquel. It complements the original story, and the original story really fucking needed it. This turned into me talking about The Fox and the Hound too, didn't it? I think in general the film suffers from skipping to adulthood too soon and staying there for way too long, so it ends up being like, wait, friendship? What friendship? But maybe that's just my bias for cute baboos being fringe.
Copper, you're my very best friend. And you're mine too, Todd.
Good exchange, movie. Admittedly, this movie is pretty gay. I mean, look at that look they give each other. That's the look I give my girlfriend. Actually, that's also the look I give my best friend. How does love work? Whatever, 5 out of 10 needs more gay princesses. The Black Cauldron is, I don't know, another 5 out of 10? It's gained something of a cult following in recent years due to it supposedly being a more dark and mature animated feature, and incidentally, cult is exactly the right word for the kind of people who flock to dark cartoons, but the movie itself is just an even-toned okay movie. This is the part of the roundup that's really draining on me because a lot of these movies are just okay. They're not great balls of shit, they're just all right, and that leaves me with very little to say about them. I'm glad the Disney Renaissance is coming around soon because those movies are at least interesting to talk about, even if they are talked about to death. This movie isn't remembered for a reason because it's just a straight fantasy that feels like it would have felt right at home in a bookstore among the piles of unsold fantasy books that did nothing different or interesting because they were too scared to break from tradition. They need to make another one where Alonwi drops the pig farmer and gets herself a girlfriend because these movies desperately need gay princesses. I don't like Sherlock Holmes stories. They just never interested me. Detective stories, sure, but Sherlock Holmes and thinly veiled spin-offs or homages to Sherlock Holmes? Not so much. I don't know, maybe it's because that one BBC show was all over the internet for a while and became part of this trifecta of TV shows whose fan base was the single most obnoxious group of antisocial malcontents ever witnessed by human eye. But honestly, I'll take hyperactive 14-year-olds over the kind of willfully blind psychopaths who still defend Steven Ubermensch. You can tell I don't actually know how to introduce The Great Mouse Detective. The movie's actually really good, but it's got that problem where the story is told in clusters and a lot of interesting things happen at certain points of the story, and the spots in between are just really dull. As a result, the story looks like a badly laid out Frostpunk city. Ratigan is probably one of the most enjoyably evil villains in all of Disney's library. Just the way he talks about how he's gonna kill Basil in particular is probably some of the most delightfully evil voice acting I've ever seen. I'm not looking forward to the live action remake of this where they change Ratigan's backstory to be about how a friend moved away when he was little, and that's why he tried to stage a coup and create a totalitarian state in Britain before Basil talks him down and they cry it out. I can't wait for the current era of animation to be over. This is where I'm in a bind though, because as much as I love this movie, I never want to watch it again. And can you really say a movie is good if that's the caveat? A lot of these movies have that caveat where, with the exception of Robin Hood, I never really want to watch any of them again. They're good movies, I'm glad I saw them, but I can't see myself owning them on Blu-ray. And Great Mouse Detective is definitely one of those movies. I'm glad to just be able to cross it off the list of Disney movies I've never seen. I mean, maybe if it had gay princesses. We're 2 for 2 on pre-Renaissance Disney movies I actually owned as a kid that still held up. The first was Robin Hood, and now we have Oliver and Company. Full disclosure, I never read Oliver Twist, and I know absolutely nothing about what happens in it. While Robin Hood saw a spike in relevancy with its talk about the rich exploiting and sucking the life out of the poor and screaming death to tyrants, which is apparently a bar that animation today doesn't seem to want to cross.
Stop being evil, Mr. Not Hitler.
Okay, I am a good guy now.
Okay, I believe you.
And over here, Oliver and Company is this heartwarming story about a poor gang dropping everything to make a little rich girl happy. That might be a tad reductionist. I love this movie because it's got a really simple plot, but it's really soft. I've been kind of starved for wholesome content the last few years, so much so I end up having to make it myself. So it's nice to still have films to turn back to that are so delightfully sweet. I can't think of a single character in this movie I don't like. I even like Roscoe and DeSoto, even though I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to. Though as much as I love Georgette for her attitude, I'm a little troubled by how she's animated. Someone on the animation team really wanted to fuck that dog, to the point that I think she ripped off her own fur at some point. The internet has kind of desensitized me to that though. It's a meme at this point that people want to fuck the Eldritch Abomination thing from Pokemon, and I'm pretty sure that's the only reason Venom made any money, so it's clear that the animal fucking fandom isn't going anywhere. Why did I make a whole tangent about furries? Right, because this movie doesn't actually have much to talk about. It's a very simple story, and that's why it's good. You can't really fuck up with simple stories, and I think that's why it remains such a memorable and fun movie. It just needs some gay princesses.
How cunning.
Okay, this movie's awesome. I love it. It's charming, it's fun, it's soft, it's sad, it's everything I want in a cartoon movie. The Little Mermaid comes under discourse from people who think it's all about selling your soul for a man, but at this point it's pretty clear that bad takes on Disney movies are like multi-hour think pieces. Mine are the most fun. I absolutely love Ariel. She's the best thing in the movie, largely because she just gives no fucks whatsoever. She wants to explore the surface and study humanity to satisfy a thirst for knowledge, and she's not gonna let anyone tell her otherwise. And I find it interesting that she is simultaneously a main character and yet drives very little of the actual story. Much of the entire second half of the film is derived mostly from King Triton being unable to control his fucking temper and behave like an actual parent rather than an authoritarian on a power trip. This is a mistake a lot of parents who have teenagers make. They think their choices are to let their children do what they please or disallow it, but in reality the choice is know what your kids are doing and not know what your kids are doing, because they're gonna do it anyway. If Triton hadn't behaved like a maladjusted toddler, then Ariel would have been able to explore the surface safely, because that's what Triton's trident can do. The fact is that the prevailing attitude that Ariel is some kind of reckless moron who doesn't learn is an extremely faulty one. It reminds me of how people said the same thing about Cinderella. Let's rip the bandage off. The scene where Triton smashes all of Ariel's possessions as a show of force and authority is a textbook abusive parenting tactic. It's an action that tacitly implies, I broke all of your stuff, I can break you. And if I were in Ariel's shoes, I'd get the fuck out of there and to the first person who can get me as far away from that psychopath as possible. Triton's abuse, and that's what it is what drives the entire second and third act of the film. And Ursula knew exactly how to prey on a terrified teenage girl and use her fear and insecurity against her. This is not Ariel's fault. In a situation where a debt collector takes advantage of a teenager trying to escape an abuser, the teenager is not the one to blame here. I've heard worse setups for what eventually becomes a love story. Hell, it's better than Beauty and the Battered Wife. It's a movie I would absolutely watch again and again and again, and certainly has cemented a top spot at the end of this project. Little Mermaid has definitely held up, even if it's still brought down by the lack of gay princesses.
Burn it!
Beauty and the Beast is a movie about a girl being held captive by a guy who wants to fuck her, and that's about it. No, really, that's as far as I got emotionally into the film. I know people are gonna make the argument about, oh, well, he learned to change his ways, blah, 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 forgiveness, blah, 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 hope punk, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing, the Beast doesn't learn to really change his ways. He just learns enough basic manners to get Belle to lower her standards. I get the idea as a premise, but the whole thing is bogged down by two massive issues. One, it's the usual crap about how a woman has to be the one to calm the rage in a man's heart, which has been the subject of so many terrible romance cliches that I think we all gag at its inclusion. Two, the fact that Belle is an unwilling prisoner can't be easily forgotten. See, we can call Beauty and the Beast many things, but a love story for the ages, it is not. This isn't even the usual issue of the original fairy tale being old, because the original fairy tale wasn't even nearly this creepy, because the Beast was actually not a rage-fueled lunatic in the original story. He was cursed by a fairy who was being spiteful, and the whole thing is about looking beyond physical beauty. In fact, you could make a pretty damn good body positivity movie out of that. But instead, the Beast is such a violent, angry jackass, and his rage is only tempered once a pretty girl takes pity on him, and I just can't with that kind of story anymore. The moment the premise is made clear, that was it. I was done. I already knew where the story was going, and I just wasn't having it. And what I don't get is how so many people can claim that it's a love story for the ages. This is now the second time where a film has featured blatantly abusive men making minuscule at best improvement toward a bare minimum level of decency, and people act like that isn't a problem. The Little Mermaid is bad because it's about a girl selling her soul for a man. Never mind that she was so driven by scientific curiosity and Eric was just a bonus, and the inciting incident that led her to finally go to the Sea Witch was a blatant and obvious threat of violence from her abusive and bigoted father. Beauty and the Beast is a love story for the ages about change and how sometimes the nice guy really does win in the end. Never mind that the change and nice in question is just basic manners, all while literally holding a woman prisoner, so you have no way of knowing whether or not she's just going along with it out of a survival instinct. Although one thing I do like about this film is that literally everything the Beast and Belle have appeared in since has portrayed them as they are and not how the film writers think they are. In both sequels, the Beast is a raging jackass, even during the parts of the story where he's supposed to be doing better.
You broke your word, and for that, you will rot in this dungeon forever.
I should have known you'd never be anything but a beast.
In the live-action remake, he's basically a passive-aggressive jagoff who talks down about all of her interests.
Actually, Romeo and Juliet's my favorite play.
Why is that not a surprise?
But the champion goes to Kingdom Hearts 2, which has the whole scene where the Beast and Belle dance and things go well, but then immediately after, the Beast flips out and screams at Belle so badly that Sora has to get between them.
But surely you can find another rose.
Silence! You don't know anything!
That's not fair, Beast. Don't take it out on Belle. It's not like she stole it.
Shit, they spent all that time trying to make the live-action remake more feminist, and Kingdom Hearts 2 just flexed on it 12 years before it was even a thing. I'm not gonna say that Bella has Stockholm Syndrome, because, well, she doesn't. Belle is characterized right from the start as having a passion for sleazy romance novels about Prince Charming, so this kind of attitude is perfectly keeping in line with her character. No, she's just a girl who swallowed the bullshit that women have been told for hundreds of years. For all my waffling, the idea that women shouldn't have to tolerate this half-assed crap is actually a new thing, as in within the last decade or so. Beauty and the Beast is noteworthy in how it turned normal Disney trends on their heads, and in 2019 there are much better films doing that, so perhaps it's time to put this one to bed and smother it to death. See, when I think of Beauty and the Beast, I think of straight relationships where the woman effectively turns into a caretaker for their boyfriend, and there are a lot of women who don't see anything wrong with that. The idea that you should expect a guy to actually act like an adult seems to be anathema to straight people. It's a sleazy romance story. It's written like a sleazy romance story. It has the values of a sleazy romance story. If that's your jam, then fine. I like to be slapped in the face and called a useless bitch during sex. I'm not about to judge, but let's dispense with the myth that this is some kind of cornerstone of great fairy tale romance. You want a love story for the ages, I got one for you. A girl meets another girl in the sandbox when they're little babus, and as they grow up, they're always inseparable. As they reach puberty and dating starts to be on their minds, it just seems natural to them that they should date each other. So they do, and things are great between them. There's a few bumps in the road. One of them has to study abroad, so they're apart for a while, but her girlfriend is still super supportive, so it works out. They deal with friend drama, family drama, personal drama, all that jazz. They deal with invasive teachers trying to split them up and force them on the path of heteronormativity, but they persist largely in part due to one of the girl's protective mother. And then when they're adults, on the anniversary of when they first met as kids, she takes her to the park where they first met and proposes to her there. Boom. That's a love story for the ages. Soft, wholesome, leaves you feeling good about life, and best of all, there's gay princesses.
Charming.
Aladdin is okay. It's the okayest of the Disney Renaissance films. I have mixed feelings about a lot of the 90s Disney films, largely in part to how often people tell me what they like about them, and then I watch the film only to realize that it isn't there at all, or what they said was awful wasn't actually that awful. Bad takes and misunderstood concepts get so ingrained into the perception of these movies that often the actual film's quality is almost completely untouched on. Aladdin, however, is not one of those films. Almost everyone and their grandmother agrees that this film is effectively carried by Robin Williams and his riffing. And because of that, your enjoyment of Aladdin is going to be entirely based on how much you enjoy Robin Williams' stand-up comedy routine, and I, personally, do not. I mean, all that time spent doing impressions could have been spent on something that would truly make the movie great, like, oh, I'm just spitballing here, gay princesses?
Do that again, and you'll pull back a stump.
I was going in excited about this film because I remember watching it as a kid because we taped it, but at the same time, I don't actually remember liking it. I remember liking a very particular part of it, and that's when Simba and Nala are being escorted by Zazu and later ditch him to go to the elephant graveyard. That's it, though. Everything else just either slid off my brain or I didn't care about. And the same thing happened here. After Simba got back from the elephant graveyard, the movie was pretty much over for me, and the only entertainment value I got out of it was just talking to Sketchy. That was the reason I even brought Sketchy on in the first place. My initial viewing only got about 5 jokes. I'm wondering why it's considered the greatest animated movie ever made by so many people. Maybe the animation itself and Mufasa's death? Actually, on reflection, that's probably exactly why. Anyway, I hate this movie because there aren't any gay princesses. Now, let's see if the comment section takes that seriously.
Basha no falortala.
This might be the most enjoyable movie out of the bunch, and I totally recommend it. I'm serious, you have to see this shit. Where to start? Pocahontas is the worst Disney movie so far, and I'm pretty sure I had more fun with it than any other film because it bounces back and forth between comical self-awareness and being an episode of My Little Pony, where the solution to an unjust invasion and displacement of a nation's inhabitants can be solved with friendship, apparently. Actually, shit, I just remembered, My Little Pony actually did that episode. Fuck. Here's what I mean. There's a point where Ratcliffe asks his underling why the Powhatan people attacked them, and the underling says rather plainly,
Because we invaded their land and cut down their trees and dug up their earth.
And then just a little bit earlier in the film, John Smith was so nakedly condescending to Pocahontas because he thinks she's stupid and talks about how he went to other places forcing English views on everyone. But then later in the film, the whole thing is characterized as violence on all sides and kill them with kindness, and the movie snaps between those two modes constantly. It's like watching Battle for Azeroth's war campaign, but without the only good character in the entire fucking story that even makes it worth playing. This movie simply cannot pick a fucking lane. It's like a centrist in film form, trying to appease the left with a disturbingly accurate portrayal of the attitudes of the colonists, but then trying to appease the right with the historically revisionist approach to storytelling that says, not all whites. It's like they were trying to have their cake and fuck it too. The constant whiplash makes this film a different breed from Disney's usual unpleasant racism. Namely, it's fucking funny. It's funny watching the directors flounder back and forth between almost getting it but trying to keep the safe fairy tale ending. And they know that because no story about Pocahontas is gonna end happily. Pocahontas was kidnapped, forcibly converted, and married, and then toured around England where she died of disease at the age of 21. So the end result that one has to ask themselves is, why the fuck would you try and make a story about any native person during the colonization of North America into a fairy tale? That's like trying to turn the residential schools into Heathers, but with, you know, slightly less death. It's pretty ghoulish to make a fairy tale out of somebody's real life, but it's ghoulish to a Lich King level to try to do that with the life of somebody who was the victim of very real atrocities. This is hard for some Americans to come to grips with, but any story that involves the natives and settlers getting along is a lie. Trying to make a Disney fairy tale set during the settling of the US is like trying to make a Disney fairy tale set during the Holocaust. You're not gonna have a good movie, you're just gonna be a less vague version of Steven Universe. Nothing can fix this movie. The only way to save it is to make a completely different movie about something else entirely. If I can make a suggestion, gay princesses?
You are all nothing!
The Hunchback is another film like The Lion King. It's got a lot of really good moments, but the parts between are just very drab and not that interesting. Again, a film made of set pieces more than anything else. It admittedly has the same critical failing The Lion King has in that it's built off a story that doesn't translate to screen very well. Trying to condense an admittedly very long book that was itself written into a different film entirely is what ends up with this kind of stilted and bursty? Yeah, that works. Bursty storytelling. Much like Pocahontas, Hunchback really wasn't something that should have been turned into a Disney animated film to begin with. Fairy tales are one thing, but every single piece of old literature shouldn't be considered prime real estate. Disney animated films are best suited to a very particular style and type of content, and the super dark, super problematic stories are not what they should be gearing themselves toward. The thing about Hunchback is that nobody can tell me anything good about it outside of how supposedly dark it is. The villain is a holy man who perverts his own religion to justify perving on a teenage girl who he hates entirely on the basis of her skin color, and while that's not a bad story in theory, to say that Disney is clumsy with it would be an understatement. The religious perversion is stripped down and its terminology watered down extremely in order to avoid offending people of Christian backgrounds, which I find weird as they already changed Frollo into a judge and added an actual priest who isn't a douchebag, so that shouldn't have been an issue. A man who perverts the church for his own agenda getting dressed down by the humble priest? That's not just Christian, that's the origins of Christianity. That's Jesus beating capitalists with a whip levels of relevant. Okay, Hellfire. Cool, that's neat I guess, though personally I'm more fond of God Help the Outcast because I'm just too old to be wowed by superficially dark subject matter. I don't care much for the gargoyles, but I'm not surprised by the fact that they're an unwelcome presence in the film because one of them is played by Jason Alexander, who is universally not funny. So end of discussion there. It ultimately comes down to whether or not you like the darkness oozing out of this movie's pores, and I honestly do not. I'm over dark. I'm done with it. I prefer wholesome interpersonal drama over this shit any day. And there's no better wholesome interpersonal drama than gay princesses.
There is only one queen on this battlefield.
Hercules is unfairly maligned. People get on his case for having too many jokes about celebrity endorsements because apparently the directors wanted to talk about that for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why they went this route, but it's often treated like the whipping boy of the Disney Renaissance, and honestly, I think that's unfair. It's certainly better than Shrek like Pocahontas and Beauty and the Beast, and compared to The Lion King and Hunchback, which were honestly just kinda dull, Hercules is pretty fun. Hercules is a pretty fun, funny, enjoyable movie, and I'm surprised because it's a mythological story, and those are hard to make watchable. I said this back when I did Prince of Egypt, in that mythological stories are hard to make watchable films out of because stories that involve deities tend to be decidedly not family friendly. Greek mythology is probably the second most violent canon out there, what with the gods in question being petty-minded tyrants. They're only ever outdone by Abrahamic religions because 3/4 of the time Jehovah is a blood psychopath who can't go without killing something for 45 seconds. So it's easy to end up in an unwinnable situation where at best you have the Prince of Egypt, where your story ends up being two fascist dictators fighting over who gets to own a group of people they can't stop killing, and at worst you end up with Steven Universe, which holds those fascists down for sloppy makeouts. Thankfully, Hercules doesn't fall into any of that, and I just wasted your time by waxing philosophical about monotheism. I do this because I hate you and I want you to suffer. And also, a family fun movie is about as far as I can describe Hercules. No, it's not accurate to the original story, but it's a fucking Disney movie. If they can't be accurate to something that actually happened, Pocahontas, what the hell makes you think they'll be accurate to anything else? One final note, however, is that Megara is the single greatest character ever made. Not just because I'm a raging lesbian, but that is part of it, but also because of her attitude. She's so fucking cynical where everyone else in these movies is starry-eyed and optimistic, or as it's known outside of Cartoon Network, stupid.
I'm a damsel. I'm in distress. I can handle this. Have a nice day.
I'm really sorry. That was dumb.
Yeah. Well, you know how men are. They think no means yes and get lost means take me, I'm yours. He comes on with his big innocent farm boy routine, but I can see through that in a Peloponnesian minute.
It's nice to see a Disney character that's an actual adult. Not gloomy and pessimistic, just 30. She's seen enough of the world that Hercules' manners just come off to her as fake, when really he is just that naive. I mean, he's 18, so of course he is. It's a fucking shame that the same voice actress also voices Pink Diamond of all people. Susan Egan doesn't deserve that shit. She's a good voice actress. She doesn't deserve to suffer through the indignity of being on Steven Universe. Give her her own show and let her play Megara again and make her gay. Actually, wait a minute. This movie's set in Greece. Where are my fucking gay princesses?
Honor means nothing to a corpse.
I think this might just be a strong contender for best Disney movie of all time, and I'm surprised about that because Mulan is another one of those this actually happened movies like Pocahontas, and yet it's just so much better. Partially because it remains mostly faithful to the original story, like all the important things are there. Mulan's there, she's badass, she saves China. All the details and specifics can be played with as long as that basic framework is adhered to. Everything else can be as movie-like as you want, and this is Mulan's greatest strength. While many other Disney films have struggled with tonal whiplash, I feel Mulan makes the best use of the concept. The scene at the burned village is probably one of the best moments I've seen in any of these films. It starts with everyone singing about how returning home from war with all the glory is going to be great, and then boom, they all get a huge fucking reality check, and you just see the complete and total destruction. This isn't fun, it's not glory, this is literally a matter of life and death. Suddenly, war doesn't seem all that fun, does it? Not like it seemed during the training montage or the song about girls, and the way it so suddenly jumps from happy singing fun time to death and destruction is such a massive, unexpected gut punch that it hits the viewer just as hard as everyone else. And honestly, Shan Yu might be my favorite Disney villain. For real, he's awesome. He is so menacing, so calculated, so deliciously evil that he's one of those villains where I can't wait to see him get beat to shit. That's what I love about these pure evil villains, is that you just keep building them up for the fight, and I love that shit. That makes my monkey brain go... Remember when villains were villains and not just bad boy wank fodder for weird creepy jackasses? God, I'm so fucking old. I really enjoyed this movie, and it was a lot better than I remember it being. It's just missing gay princesses.
That will suffice.
This is another movie I was surprised to like as much as I did. I'd always heard people talk shit about Tarzan like it was some kind of lesser Disney movie, but after seeing how well Mulan held up and how poorly Beauty and the Beast held up, I'm more open to being surprised. Honestly, it's the characters that get to me. Tarzan himself is one of those I have issues in my life, but I choose not to let them consume me characters that I wish we got more of these days. That ability to control your impulses ultimately makes it more impactful when he does have a moment where things become too much for him to bear. I wish more Disney protagonists would work that way. Tarzan goes through this really interesting arc about nature versus nurture, where he goes back and forth between being with other humans and staying with his family. And at first it seems like he's gonna leave and go to London, but after a confrontation with the poachers, realizes that he's been home the whole time. Weirdly enough, though, all that falls apart with Jane, who basically abandons her entire life to stay with Tarzan. And I mean, Jane's a respected scientist, and it's weird, okay? I think Tarzan and Jane are super cute, honestly. Like, I love them as a couple. But this is a massive oversight for the writers, and they deserve at least 5 hits with a stick. A really thin, whippy kind of stick. Maybe if Tarzan was a girl, it'd make more sense, because who the fuck wants to be gay in Victorian England? Fuck, I'd move to the jungle in a heartbeat if that were the case. God, I'm not even done talking about the film, and I'm already on the gay princesses. Everything about this movie feels like Pocahontas, but not shit. Especially since Tarzan is a fictional tale already and not actual revisionist history. The British moving in on an already inhabited place, the language barriers, Tarzan learns English very quickly for some reason, and hey, Jane even learns to speak gorilla, that's cool. The story stakes are a lot more grounded when you're not being thrown out of the story by the sheer audacity of Disney's caucasity. At first I thought Sabor should have been saved for the final act rather than the second act like she is in the film, but on reflection I think it's a really good story element. Sabor ends up being the way in which Tarzan earns Kerchak's approval and becomes a respected member of the group, which is then what makes it so hard for Tarzan to choose between staying in the jungle or leaving with Jane. It also provides the necessary weight for when Kerchak loses his newfound respect for Tarzan after he leads the humans to the gorillas, and then gets it back when Tarzan comes back to save them from the poachers. Had Tarzan not finally gotten what he wanted from the start of the film to begin with, a lot of this would carry less personal weight for Tarzan and by extension the audience. God, this movie's so fucking good. Also, and I know this is weird to fixate on, but Jane is fucking adorable. She's one of the most delightfully cute characters I've seen that wasn't a critter. I think it's the facial animation, especially when her hair is down, but it's just so much fun to see her react to everything. It makes her scientific curiosity even more endearing than it already was, but that might just be because I'm a huge lesbian. Also, I love Tarzan's mother. She's valid, deserves hugs. And that scene where Tarzan says that no matter where he goes, she will always be his mother. Just... oh, it gets me right in my dumb found family loving heart. Found family is the best trope, and Tarzan is great because of it. I'm gushing. Anyway, it just needs gay princesses and it'll be perfect. Alright, who's done this? Who's responsible for this? Because I want to give him a big old hand job. The Emperor's New Groove is so retroactively refreshing. It was popular when it was released, but it's one of those 2000s productions that really stands out today as we all crawl out of the ditch of tropey fanfiction that the last decade swiftly became. It's a buddy comedy slash road trip slash revenge movie that's all about 2 things: fun characters and hijinks. That's it. One character wants to not be a llama, one wants him dead, and hilarity ensues. The whole film is packed with some of the most hilarious writing in any film fucking ever, and it's just a fun romp from start to finish. I can't imagine anyone not liking this movie unless you're either a joyless asshole who gets mad when things are funny or a bread tuber who can't get past Emperor Cusco without busting a blood vessel. But when it comes to analysis, I'm a filthy casual, so if you give me enough silly jokes and soft moments, I'll overlook anything. Hell, I'll smooch a Sith if there's enough cheesy adorableness attached to it. Speaking of smooching a Sith, that's all the Emperor's New Groove is missing to be perfect. Gay princesses. Well, you got the princess part, didn't he? Atlantis is literally just a straight line Tetris block of adventure. Let's go find the lost city of Atlantis. We'll be famous. Oh hey, there's people still living here. Guess we're gonna raid like old-fashioned colonialism. Visually, the film is impressive, and the idea of a civilization of immortal people losing their culture over the generations and needing help in jolting their way of life back to life is interesting in a contextless vacuum, but it comes down to the problem of who is doing the enlightening. You know what? Let's be honest. You don't care. I don't care. This film gets by with most people on the visuals, and the themes of the film and how they work is all just so much background noise, and honestly, Atlantis isn't even worth the effort. This is all shit I've said before, and if you were paying attention then, you noticed it here, and if you weren't paying attention then, you're not going to pay attention the 5th time around. Gay princess is next. This movie's weird. Good weird, but weird. I'll level with you, I went into Lilo and Stitch expecting to hate it, not because it's a bad movie, but because it's packed to the gills with all the trappings of storytelling that the new 10s have ground into the dirt, to the point that I and many others hate them on principle these days. But thankfully all the alien shit in this movie is very unobtrusive. It goes along with the main central theme of the story and complements it rather than getting in the way. Both Lilo and Stitch are hounded at all times by their respective governments trying to take them away, as they so desperately try to make the best of a bad situation. If you're someone who feels the stuff with the aliens gets in the way of Lilo's relationship with her sister, I implore you to take another look because they run the same track at all times. I find where this movie truly splits people is on whether or not Lilo should have been taken away by social services or kept with Nani. But that's a false dilemma because those are not the only options available. I'm strongly of the opinion that Nani is not fit to parent Lilo and she desperately needs help. A sentiment the film goes along with, as the moment Nani has a few extra pair of hands around the house, everything goes much better. What bothers me is the fact that this doesn't seem to occur to anyone around her, especially Cobra himself. Like, bitch, you're a social worker. It is literally your fucking job to notice this shit and provide the resources. You can't sit there and tell me your only job is putting kids into foster care. That is such a massive waste of effort, value, money, space, and time, especially when the root cause of the problem is obvious. Cobra could solve a lot of problems if he offered to look after Lilo once or twice while Nani gets all of her ducks in a row. Nani probably would have had a job within an hour if she didn't have to constantly keep an eye on Lilo and Stitch throughout her interviews. Between Cobra and David, most of these problems could have easily been solved. Hell, by the end, Cobra even blames Nani for shit that couldn't possibly be her fucking fault. The way the film uses social services as a cudgel to advance the story really only highlights just how little Nani actually needs to get everything secure for both herself and Lilo, and yet she is consistently left hanging out to dry by everybody. This is something that really throws me out of the movie because the solution in every single instance is so fucking easy and yet it never occurs to anyone. Hell, when Nani goes to take the interview in the 3rd act, David just runs down with her when any sensible person would say, "I'll watch Lilo for you while you're gone," and Lilo is left to her own devices, and as a result, Cobra literally doesn't believe her when she says aliens are attacking. The more I think about this, the angrier I get. This isn't really an objective view of the movie because, like, child welfare is a very touchy subject for me, so I'm just gonna set this aside and stop before I start screaming at someone. Gay princess is next. Holy shit, why is this movie so good? For real, I'll get to the story in a minute, haha, but just give me a second to gush about something I don't really get to gush about, and that's the animation and art design. This is the most visually creative movie in the fucking universe. Treasure Planet screams impractical but awesome. Hey, we're gonna do Treasure Island in space. Did we change the naval ships to spaceships? No. Rocket-powered frigates with sails being solar panels. The spaceport? It's shaped like a fucking crescent moon. The flintlock pistols shoot lasers. There's still swords and shit. The spaceship, which moves on a 360-degree sphere, is controlled by an old-timey wheel, and everyone's tied down in emergencies with rope, so it's possible for someone to fall overboard right into a black hole. No, I don't care if they can't breathe in space, Carl. Shut up, it's awesome. The pirates aren't Han Solo types. No, they're literally fucking pirates. Peg legs? No. Cyborg limbs that look like peg legs. It's like someone gave a 3-year-old an old pirate movie in Star Wars and then gave them a stack of crayons. Everything screams, fuck your practicality, I want my space pirate movie. And I'm so happy about that. I live for animated movies that just have so much animation. So you can spend hours meticulously detailing the face or body language of a character, but it'll ultimately pale in comparison to the kind of fuck you imagination at movies like Treasure Planet. And that imagination is shared with the writing. This is one of the best casts of characters I've ever seen. There's only one character who I could say is cliched, and that's Jim. He's basically every mopey teenage heartthrob that was making the rounds in the early 2000s. The kind that would be played by Leonardo DiCaprio in the 90s, or Hayden Christensen in 2002, or Tom Holland today. Same mannerisms, same story arc, same broody attitude. I mean, he's not a bad character. I love Anakin in Attack of the Clones. I thought his dumb, mopey bullshit was fun to watch unfold. I'm just saying that among the rest of the characters, he stands out in being just okay. The best characters are tied between Mr. Silver and Captain Amelia. Silver for being that kind of genuinely complex character that straddles a line between hero and villain. There's always a plan for Mutiny to get Flint's treasure, and incidentally, the film makes no attempt to hide Silver's involvement since Jim notices that he's a cyborg like Bones said was after him, but has to keep reining the others in when they consistently murder and sabotage the rest of the crew. Silver even threatens to kill Scroop for killing Mr. Arrow because it was a risky and dangerous stunt. You can see right from the start that Silver is genuinely conflicted between his affection for Jim and a treasure he spent a lifetime searching for, and also all his cybernetics are wickedly creative, and once again an example of just how visually imaginative this film is. Then there's Captain Amelia, who, short version, is if Janeway was also a cat. The dynamic between her and Mr. Arrow is fucking great, but all of her dialogue is pure fucking gold.
And Doctor, again, with the greatest possible respect, zip your howling screamer.
The authoritative and honestly just fucking amazing dialogue is only magnified by her expressiveness. This is probably one of the best animated characters in all of Disney's canon, and another example of how detail and fluidity pales in comparison to good art direction. It's just a shame they had to shove her into a forced hetero relationship with fucking Dr. Doppler at the end of the film. She had much better chemistry with her rock husband before he got black holed. Good fucking god, some habits are hard to break, aren't they, Disney? If it were up to me, Amelia would have married Jim's mother, because if you're gonna have a romance be forced out of the blue like that, it might as well be something healthy and wholesome. Wouldn't want the children thinking heterosexuality is okay. Stop forcing a straight agenda in everything, Disney. Don't get me wrong, I like Dilbert. He's a fun character and a welcome addition to the cast, but he's not good enough for this to be a thing. Honestly, Amelia getting incapacitated like she does in the third act is just kind of bullshit. As much as I like Jim's robot buddy, I would gladly replace him with Amelia as the one scouting and solving puzzles with Jim once they make it to Treasure Planet. Let Dilbert get wounded. I just love characters like her. They're some of my favorite to write and read about. Interestingly enough, despite the story literally spanning galaxies, it's not really an exploration story. The world building is bare bones at best, which is good because you only know about as much of the galaxy as you need to. It's ultimately, well, what Dilbert said it would be, a few character building months in space. Flint's treasure, and admittedly Flint himself, are just an excuse for all these characters to go through their respective arcs within the same place. That's the kind of world building that makes a good story, only as much as you need. I'm sure there's no shortage of people who want to know why everyone can breathe in space, or how the hyperdrives work, or how everything was built, or how the ships are designed to run, but the movie just gives all that a shrug and goes, it doesn't matter, it's not important to the story, it's the good fucking food. Treasure Planet, like Mulan and Tarzan, is a strong contender for best Disney film ever made, and it would have absolutely clinched it if instead of giving us a forced hetero romance out of nowhere, the directors opted for gay princesses. Sorry, gay captains. Brother Bear is a story about a man who gets turned into an animal in order to learn a lesson about maturity. Wait, didn't we just do this? I could have sworn we just did this. Okay, so Brother Bear is better than Pocahontas, and honestly, that is about as much as I can say about it. A lot of the film stood out to me on watching it, but the only thing that really stayed with me was that it was better than Pocahontas, and somehow, I don't really know why, that sums up the entire movie better than anything else I could think of to write. It's weird, I know. Okay, so Chicken Little, shit, I forgot to say gay princesses for Brother Bear. Chicken Little is a movie I remember kinda liking, but wasn't expected to go back and enjoy as much as I did. I have something of a distrust of nostalgia, and the things I liked as a kid are 50-50 on whether or not they hold up upon a more discerning viewing. But Chicken Little is one of those movies that did hold up. It's one of the most delightful movies I've seen in a long time. There's so much wit on display in the humor and the characters, and it all gets kinda thrown at you rapid fire like an extended Family Guy cutaway. You know what? Family Guy cutaways are basically just Tumblr shitposts, and shitpost perfectly describes this damn film. If you watch it for anything, watch it for Fish and Runt. These two are some of the funniest goddamn characters I've ever seen, especially Runt with his affinity for music that is just probably one of the best methods of getting popular music into a film I've ever seen, and I love it for that. Good mention goes to the relationship between Chicken Little and his father, namely due to the fact that his father actually apologizes to him for his negligence and lack of emotional support when he's confronted on it. I know it seems like kind of small potatoes, but in a time where a lot of shows aimed at children are kind of just not bothering with this in regards to incredibly worse behavior, it's so nice to see this handled well. Buck doesn't mean to hurt his son, that much is clear. That apology at the climax of the film really sells just how much he hadn't realized he was alienating his son, and the sincerity with which he made amends for that. Compare and contrast to the last episode of Tangled, the series' first season, where Rapunzel's father locks her away in a tower. Oops! And then her mother tries to gaslight her by telling her how his actions come from a place of love. Basically, I mean well, therefore it's okay. Seeing a father be taken to task for his shitty behavior toward his kid and actually apologize and make amends for it without a single backhanded remark or excuse? God, the child in me just squealed in delight. When I was a kid, that's all I ever wanted to hear from either of my parents, and seeing it happen in a movie is just, the good fucking food. This movie was criticized for how mean-spirited it is, but after the diamonds turned out to be a metaphor for a dysfunctional family, it's nice to see a film understand what a dysfunctional family actually is. I mean, it's so good I'm not even that bothered by the lack of gay princesses. The Princess and the Frog isn't great material for a Disney film to begin with, but Disney made waves with the announcement that Tiana would be the first black Disney princess. Cool, that's like the first interesting thing to hear about this film. But then Disney decided to set the film in 1920s southern United States. Wow, I thought upon first hearing that. A Disney film set in the Jim Crow era and taking a classic fairy tale along with it? Damn, I'm actually impressed. It's gonna be interesting watching Disney navigate the absolute horrors of the Jim Crow era with The Princess and the Frog while managing to keep everything kid-friendly. I get that the fairy tale is only about 2 pages long, so stretching it into a 90-minute movie is difficult unless your name is Peter Jackson, but dear lord, they didn't need to complicate it this badly. The story's an absolute mess of deadlines, technicalities, and loopholes that's so easy to lose track of. At the end, both Tiana and Naveen dispel their curse on a technicality, because once Tiana married Naveen, she was technically a princess, and so Naveen kissed a princess, and that's why they're human again. Also, weird question, and I probably should have led with this, why is this film set in the Jim Crow South and yet for some reason doesn't remark on it at all? The movie goes so far out of its way to portray the wealthy white family as nice and well-intentioned, but that opens up even more issues in the story. Like if this wealthy sugar baron is willing to haul ass out to the other side of the city because he likes your cooking that much, and your families have been on such good terms with each other for so long and is described to be very generous with his wealth, why don't you just get a small business loan from him? Even Naveen sees that idea, as giving Tiana the money for her restaurant was a condition Naveen gave to Charlotte, so what's stopping Tiana from getting help where she needs it? Is it pride? Is Tiana just too proud to take advantage of an extremely fortunate situation? On second thought, never mind, I actually like that. It really magnifies the importance of that bit where Charlotte hires Tiana to cater a party, and the money she'd make is enough to buy the building for her restaurant.
Okay, now how much have you won so far?
Wow. 700.
Not 700 exactly.
Yeah.
Double it.
Actually, I like Tiana in general. Tiana's one of my favorite Disney characters, right up there with Rapunzel and Disney's goodest boy. It's actually kind of a shame where she's put in a film where her sheer bullheaded determination is repeatedly slammed with misfortune and shame until she gives up on her dreams and surrenders to the typical Disney marriage. It seems like after so many years of being off-brand, Disney decided to go back to formula in the worst possible way. And along that road, they decided to spitefully lash out at people who were retroactively criticizing Cinderella while simultaneously forgetting what made that movie memorable. I get this film has a theme that family is more important than anything else, but it seems like the entire film spitefully goes out of its way to force that lesson into Tiana's head despite the fact that she didn't need to learn it. Tiana's father didn't neglect his family in the pursuit of his restaurant, but that doesn't apply to Tiana because she maintains a positive relationship with her mother and her best friend, and doesn't have a spouse or children to neglect. Tiana ultimately doesn't need to learn that lesson because she already took it to heart. Don't neglect your family for the pursuit of a dream. She doesn't because she didn't have one. She even says this herself.
I don't have time for dancing. That's just gonna have to wait a while.
Tiana making the decision to forego trying to start a family until after she has her restaurant was her realizing that if she had a family, she would likely never achieve her dream. And also that having a family is something that can wait until she has the time and means to have one. It's an extremely responsible decision that takes the lesson the movie beats into her head to heart. But instead, the film spends the entire runtime going, "No, husband, now!"
And it's not my style.
I want some grandkids.
Guys, she's fucking 19 years old. She has plenty of time to start a family. Get off her back. I know in the 1920s it was expected for women to be married right out of school, but if you're going to just sidestep past the uncomfortable racism of the 20s, why are you reinforcing the uncomfortable sexism? Pick a fucking lane already, guys. And Tiana already had love in her life. Even if you don't think it's gay, there is no doubt that Lottie absolutely loves Tiana to bits. When her other friends are being catty to her about her having to work, Lottie ultimately doesn't do that, and even cheers for her when Tiana realizes that she'll make enough from the catering job to actually get her restaurant.
This should cover it just fine, Lottie. This is it. I'm getting my restaurant.
Naveen does the same thing when he starts to actually care about her. Tiana's restaurant is important to her, and as such it's important to him because, spoiler alert, that's what love is. Tiana is discouraged and roadblocked to her dream by everyone telling her that love is more important. But the people who actually love her are also the only characters who don't do that, because loving someone doesn't mean asking them to completely abandon what would make them happy just for your sake. Wow, that got personal. Tiana is told to give up on her dream based on the idea of a spouse and children, not on any that presently exist. In order for Tiana's workaholism to actually be something she needs to unlearn, it would either need to be severely damaging to her health, which it isn't, we only see her not getting enough sleep once, and she seems to be well rested anyway, or causing her to neglect a family she already has, which it doesn't. Without those things, Tiana doesn't really have to learn shit. And you look at stuff like that, not just the simple themes of the film, but the fact that the overall conflict orchestrating much of it is so convoluted and packed to the gills with loopholes and misdirections and side characters that go nowhere. Is it any wonder that this film flopped? People say this film flopped because of racism, but I have yet to meet a single person who doesn't absolutely love Tiana. She's one of the most popular and well-loved characters Disney has, and Dr. Facilier is considered to be one of the best villains Disney has ever made. There were people clamoring for this movie to be in Kingdom Hearts 3. I should know because I was one of them. This film didn't flop because of racism or a bias against 2D animation. It flopped because it's an overly complicated mess with way too many moving parts and a general theme about love that seems like it was written by the most miserable heterosexual bastard to have ever crawled their way out of a creative writing course. It's a film that embodies the imaginary version of Cinderella that people like to pretend Disney actually made. A film where a woman with her own tangible dreams beyond simply wanting more is repeatedly and endlessly psychologically battered into a kind of character that would be more comfortable for the men who directed this damn movie. Tiana is an absolutely wonderful character, and she deserved a better fucking movie than this piece of god-awful shit. A movie about Tiana's pride and the value of hard work and the uncomfortable reality that hard work ultimately isn't rewarded. A movie like this.
Nobody does anything without help, Will. People open doors for me, and I worked hard to open doors for you. It doesn't make you any less of a man to walk through them.
And maybe some gay princesses as well. And also maybe don't release it a few days before Avatar. That probably didn't help. This is it, my favorite goddamn Disney movie. No joke, from the moment it released in 2010, Tangled has been my favorite Disney movie in the entire collection. And that seems to be something I'm surprisingly alone on. I don't find a lot of people for whom this is their favorite Disney film. It's usually Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, The Little Mermaid, or Aladdin, but I can find fault with all of those movies. I simply can't find fault with Tangled at all. Everything about it, I love. All my favorites are here. Rapunzel is my favorite Disney princess. Eugene is my favorite Disney prince. Mother Gothel is my favorite Disney villain. I've Got a Dream is my favorite Disney musical number. It's just, I love absolutely everything. Tangled is one of those movies that is nothing but sheer joyful energy from start to finish. Okay, maybe not quite in the third act when Mother Gothel shows her true colors and Eugene is dying and the healing magic isn't working. God damn it, Donald! I wasn't kidding a minute ago. Mother Gothel is my favorite Disney villain. I like that she's not a twist villain, but that she's a much sneakier villain. The audience knows her true nature, which means they can make Gothel as convincing as possible in order to really sell the whole emotionally abusive parenting trick. Films with these kind of villains who hide their real motivations tend to suffer from brain-dead audience syndrome, where the audience will wombify the villains into the most precious small babs and give them the Rebecca Sugar treatment, and Gothel is the kind of villain where someone could have easily gone, "See? She really cared about Rapunzel," like people do with Thanos had the movie not immediately made it clear to the audience that Gothel is a lying snake. I mean, people still try to sugarcoat Mother Gothel, but it's a lot more obvious that they're brainless and stupid. But even better than Gothel is Rapunzel. I love Rapunzel. She's my favorite Disney princess, and I've always loved protagonists who are just the sunniest children, and Rapunzel is competing with Sora for the title of sunniest child in all of Disney, even though she's not a child. Rapunzel has a Cinderella quality to her, where much of the investment in the story is simply wanting her to have the things that make her happy. It's a very simple desire that plays on a person's empathy. It's generally a very fun, simple movie, and coming off the aggressively complicated Princess and the Frog, it's nice to have a movie that is straightforward and simple. That's why I love it so much. It's just so fun and so good to have around that rewatching it always makes me happy, even if it doesn't have gay princesses. Okay, Wreck-It Ralph is probably one of the more glaring omissions in this project because a lot of people really liked it, but I got exactly 13 minutes in and I just simply couldn't watch anymore. Maybe it's just secondhand awkwardness, but the moment things got to the party in the first act, I just couldn't stomach it anymore. I know for a fact that Michaela only ever saw this movie for the Sonic cameo because she made the egregious mistake of liking Sonic in her formative years. That's literally the closest thing to appeal this movie has.
Why are you mean to the things I love?
Maybe Jennifer Lee's awkward dialogue could be easier to tolerate if there was something more appealing, like gay princesses. Apparently not. Okay, Frozen is a film I have very mixed feelings about. Every time I think of something I like about it, something wrong with it jumps right up beside it. It's got an interesting story about true love being universal, but it bungles it in a desire to mislead the audience for a shocking twist. It subverts the tropes of previous Disney films regarding love at first sight, but Tangled did it better, and Frozen's main method of delivering that idea is just to repeat it over and over and over again. It's got gay subtext, except it doesn't, and if it did, it'd be really cursed when you think about it. Oh yeah, and speaking of which, the relationship between Elsa and her sister is a really good framework for the story and the kind of thing Disney needs more of, but its execution in this film is so fucking weird. This is gonna fucking hurt. So yes, Frozen has a very interesting theme about love being universal, that true love doesn't necessarily have to be romantic love, demonstrated in how the troll says that only an act of true love will thaw a frozen heart, and everyone else just assumes that to mean a kiss from a lover. But where that logic falters is that you can kiss anyone, you don't even have to think about kissing someone, and they devalue the idea of true love's kiss by rushing for it so desperately. Ultimately, Anna's salvation comes not from true love's kiss, but by actively sacrificing herself to save her sister, who she loves so much she couldn't bear to see her be hurt. What makes that so impactful is that of all the characters in the movie, Anna had wanted to get out and experience life more than anyone else, yet in spite of the burning passion to live, she didn't even hesitate to throw herself in front of a fatal sword blow in a desperate effort to shield her estranged sister. She didn't just put Elsa's needs before herself, she threw away all the hopes and dreams she'd been nurturing for the last 13 years in a split-second decision. On top of how brave Anna is when she blocks the sword, it also shows how utterly selfless and forgiving she is. It's easy to forget this, but the audience is aware of Elsa's personal conflicts and difficulties and could fully sympathize with her. Yet by Elsa's own design, Anna had no idea what kind of person her sister is. Elsa had shut Anna out without explanation for 13 years and had seemingly abandoned her to bury and mourn their parents alone, had her locked up in the castle for years, and then imperiled the entire kingdom. After Anna has risked wolves, exposure, and hostile terrain to find Elsa, while keeping faith that Elsa was not malicious and that the endless winter was a misunderstanding, Anna finally finds her, but Elsa creates an ice monster to chase Anna away and accidentally strikes her in the heart with ice, which is killing her bit by bit. Worse, Anna doesn't see the look of shock on Elsa's face after she's struck, only the guilt. So she doesn't even know that it was an accident and that Elsa didn't strike out of temper. Elsa may have had good reasons for all this, but had we seen the movie purely from Anna's perspective, we could have easily been misled into assuming that Elsa was a villain. Yet in the end, Anna's love for her sister and faith in her is even greater than all the pain she caused. Anna's willing to sacrifice herself for the sister who had seemingly ruined her life. These are all good things to explore in a story, but the problem is that none of this stuff can really be as explored as it should be. Anna and Elsa's relationship takes up a good portion of the movie, but very little is actually explored with them, and how they feel about each other don't even fucking start because the film is keeping this charade until the big twist ending. Everything is hamstrung by this desire to subvert expectations and create a twist. If the film had been straightforward about being about familial love, this probably would have been a lot more emotionally satisfying. I'd argue that Maleficent does it better because there's less of a meta-text to the film as there is a character arc. Maleficent believes true love doesn't exist, so making true love's kiss be the only way to break Aurora's spell is an act of vengeful spite. It isn't until she ends up having to make sure Aurora makes it to her 16th birthday and she starts to get attached that she has to learn that love comes in many forms. It's ultimately the grief, anguish, and regret at having hurt someone who had become like a daughter to her. It helps that Maleficent explicitly makes the only way to break the curse be true love's kiss rather than simply an act of true love, because like I said earlier, anyone can kiss you. That's why being kissed by a total stranger won't break the curse. Being kissed by someone who loves her, regardless of what kind of love it is what breaks the curse. This is all presented as bitter cynicism from Maleficent, and for good reason, but it's ultimately a lesson she has to learn. The theme is part of her character arc. Frozen isn't doing that. It's more concerned with hammering the theme home to the audience by playing on their expectations and then smugly looking back like, oh, you were expecting romance? Well, don't you feel silly? Sounds like you have some things to learn. And how'd that work out for you, Jennifer? Oh yeah, that's right, it didn't. Likewise with the subversion of love at first sight as a Disney trope. I don't know if Jennifer Lee actually checked before writing this film, but that was handled in Tangled by having two characters fall in love after several days of mutually supporting one another, and even risking their lives for each other and not immediately getting married at the end. When Rapunzel starts to suspect Eugene has feelings for her, she doesn't say something about true love, she just says,
I think he likes me.
True love is not a theme of Tangled, ultimately doesn't have a theme beyond live your dream and then find new ones to live. It's just a story that includes two people genuinely falling in love with one another, and it does more to tear down the old Disney tropes of love at first sight than Frozen ever could. The two things that dominated the discourse for Frozen more than anything else was not the theme of familial love or the subversion of old school Disney tropes. It was the perceived gay subtext of Elsa's entire story arc, as well as dragging Jennifer Lee for having absolutely no clue how estranged siblings behave. Frozen is certainly an enjoyable movie. It's not the best thing ever made, but it is pretty up there. It'll definitely have a spot in the top 5 when this is all over, but the entire film suffers from this overwhelming desire to be smart and clever when it really isn't as smart and clever as it likes to think it is, to the point where the phrase Anna has more romantic chemistry with her sister than she does with Hans is simultaneously a funny joke at the expense of how frail his engagement to Anna is, as well as an actual legitimate criticism of the film. It's a movie that desperately needs some gay print. Actually, you know what? This is a movie that should probably be a little less gay. Okay, so here's the thing. Big Hero 6 is an objectively good movie. It covers topics of grief and counseling in an interesting way and only suffers from too many characters and just some minor pacing issues. And I honestly do not care a single lick about it. I enjoyed the movie, I thought it was good, but the prospect of putting in enough effort to talk about it in a roundup is just soul-crushingly disappointing. And I feel the same way about Zootopia, a really, really good movie that I loved, and I just do not want to talk about it. To build off what I said a moment ago, because I don't really want to repeat myself, the reason Disney animated films fit into two categories. You have the princess films and the off-brand films. And it's become clear to me that regardless of how well they actually do, I just enjoy the princess films more. The off-brand films try really hard to be about things and have important messages, and while I recognize the objective quality in that, subjectively, I'm still just so sick of the desperate push cartoons make to be deep and adult that despite knowing on some level that Zootopia is better than Moana, I just get more excited about Moana because it's about characters first. The majority of the film is centered around Moana and Maui in a vast ocean where there is nothing as far as the eye can see, and everything centers back to either the pressure put on Moana to save the world and her desire to restore her people's Voyager culture, and Maui's desperate need for validation that becomes so all-encompassing that he horribly wrongs another living being in order to get it. I find both of those stories compelling, and the adventure serves the purpose of furthering that story. Moana is so uninterested in world building that it takes place in the middle of the goddamn ocean. This whole movie feels like both the better version of both Pocahontas and Atlantis now that I think about it. It has a lot of the same story beats and elements of both films, especially Atlantis' whole restore dying culture undercurrent, but with the culture being restored from within this time instead of whatever the fuck the writers of Atlantis were smoking. And there isn't a whole lot to say about it in the structure of the Roundup because it is a deceptively simple film. You can cover most of what it's about in just a few sentences, and as such, it's a very approachable film. This isn't like Frozen, which is a rather densely packed film and as such requires more time to cover everything. Moana has two running stories and it handles those stories in a straightforward manner. It's damn good. Just needs gay princesses. You know, my biggest issue with Frozen 2 isn't the story or the writing for once, it's actually with the art direction. I know, crazy, but hear me out. So the film makes use of models from the first movie, save for a few updates in certain cases and some more powerful rendering technology, but for the most part the characters are all the same. Even the new characters fit in a shot with them aesthetically, though you can see some noticeable differences between them in terms of aesthetic design. But the environments are all in this pseudo-realistic, highly textured style which clashes really badly with the cartoonish aesthetics of the characters. It makes the entire film look like the Pirates of the Caribbean world in Kingdom Hearts 2, where you've got this realistic, grimy texturing to the environment, but then Sora, Donald, Goofy, and Pete are all their usual selves, and that sticks out like the sorest thumb. This isn't the case in every shot. I mean, the shots in the autumn forest tend to blend really well, considering all the colors on display. It's when they're in any environment that is green, brown, or gray, or darkly lit in any fashion that everything sticks out the most. And it actually took me a while to notice this. When the first teaser trailer dropped, the first shot is in this dark, gray, moody lighting on a shoreline, and I'm like, okay, what's this? And then you get a close-up on Elsa's face, and it's like, what the fuck? This is a Frozen movie? It looks nothing like Frozen. Actually, you know what? I lied. That's not my biggest issue with the film. The biggest issue I have with the film is the fact that they clearly had no genuine ideas going into this film beyond make another one of the things that made $1 billion. And you know what that means? What do we do when we're creatively bankrupt? World build. It's hilarious because watching the film, you can see the inklings of an interesting story with the whole issue with the dam and the way the indigenous people out in the forest were attacked unprovoked by white invaders, continuing Frozen's trend of having twists with only 2 possible reactions.
What?
A simple, straightforward story, but nonetheless a good one. It serves as a good way to explore the whole 4 new characters we have, and the one who looks actually interesting to explore, especially since there's a conflict between the Northuldra people and the Arendelle guards who've been stuck in the forest with them. So, does Frozen 2 do that?
No.
Most of the characters sit by the wayside twiddling their thumbs while Elsa discovers the secret of her powers, something that apparently the writers felt the need to focus on, and that takes us on a guiding tour of Nordic mythology. You know Nordic mythology, it's all about places. Once Elsa's mother mentioned Atahallen, I knew exactly where this was going, and I was right. The entire plot focuses on Elsa getting to Atahallen alone for some reason, and seeing the ice holograms that make up her own history. I mean, we could have just spoken to the Northuldra people about what happened, learned that the unprovoked attack from them was actually self-defense because Arendelle attacked unprovoked, had the main characters brush up against their biases and deal with that, but instead, let's have Elsa run to her death into an iceberg, learn the truth about Arendelle from some hallucinations, and then have Anna learn the truth by medium of instant snowman. And I know what you're gonna say, if we didn't have Atahallen, we wouldn't learn about the reason behind Elsa's powers. I'm just gonna say it, would that have been a bad thing? Elsa's powers didn't need an explanation to make the first movie good. I can't see why they would need one here. I know the explanation behind magic and the detailing of magic systems is something hardcore fans like to focus on, but do most people honestly give a shit? I know people who make clickbait theory videos about the
dark secret behind Frosty the Snowman's corncob pipe.
Will probably care a lot, but should an entire movie really have its story centered around trying to please those jackasses? The end result is that the things that matter get left by the wayside. The actually important themes are an afterthought concluded in the last 10 minutes. None of the characters get to do or act like more than watered down versions of themselves because all the focus is on the world. And all these problems lend themselves into the clashing art direction, where the movie's trying to force Frozen to be something it's not. You remember how in the lead up to Frozen 2, one of the biggest things people wanted was to give Elsa a girlfriend? I think that makes my point the best. What people wanted from this movie was more character-focused things. We wanted Elsa to grow and continue that growth from the first film. We just wanted good things for Elsa, and really, who wouldn't? And it's telling that Jennifer Lee opted not to do that on the basis that she didn't think Elsa was ready for that. And you're right, she would have been ready by the end of the first film, but it's been 3 years and there's an entire other film of growth left to go. People act like this film was gay baiting Elsa and Honeymaren, and while gay baiting is a serious issue we need to take more seriously, this ain't it. Elsa and Honeymaren talk precisely once, and while they're passionate about what they're talking about, it's not really romantic, so to speak, and the two never spend any time together after that. If this is gay baiting, then the cuddling scene earlier in the film is a fucking steamy romance novel. I fall back on what I said in the glass of water video. The director just did not want Elsa to be gay, and she can't say that because Twitter would rightfully get on her case for it for a week, and as we all learned from the ContraPoint scandal, some people view a week of mockery as being the same as apparently. The focus on world building really tells me that the writers and the director really wanted to make another Frozen movie, but they didn't have an actual idea for it because Frozen was pretty neatly wrapped up and stood on its own merits. You could have gone and just let Elsa have a girlfriend, but that ultimately comes into the same problem as the world building focus we actually have. The only people who wanted a sequel are the people who had headcanons and theories they wanted to see validated. That's all Frozen 2 is, a Twitter post saying your headcanon is correct. Because Frozen 2 is a pandering film. It has everything the fandom trademark wants in a sequel. It has callbacks and references to the first movie. It has a little bit of gay baiting. It has characters watered down to one-dimensional versions of themselves to be easier for fandom culture to process and easily warp to whatever suits their fancy for their fan works, and it tries really hard to be in on the joke. None of this would have happened if you just gave people the gay princesses they always wanted. Just saying. I simultaneously have a lot to say about A Twist in Time and also very little. Talking about the film itself is actually pretty easy. The wicked stepmother goes back in time to ruin Cinderella's happily ever after. Cinderella says, "Nuh-uh," and hilarity ensues. The rest of the film is an extended third act of the first one, punctuated with magic, slapstick humor, and the prince being a delightful himbo. It takes an opportunity to expand on characters that previously couldn't have been expanded on. I wouldn't say it fixes Cinderella, it doesn't. Cinderella didn't actually need fixing. Cinderella is more active in pursuing the prince, but that isn't a fix to the first one, because the first one was more about Cinderella clinging to hope to get her through what was honestly some pretty horrendous abuse. Cinderella doesn't get things handed to her, people show her compassion when she's in a hard spot. That's not a problem with the first film. The prince has more of a character, but that's not a fix of a problem in the first film. The prince was always a plot device, a means to an end, a way for Cinderella to have a nice night that she fucking deserved and then get out of this horrible place. This feels less like trying to fix the first film and more of just deciding to do something different because it might be fun to do something different. They didn't make Cinderella more active because the first movie needed to be fixed. They did it because it would be cool. They didn't make the prince more of a lovely dolt because it needed to be fixed. They did it because it would be fun. And this whole film really does feel like a fun time. The general attitude of the first film is still there. Because just like in the first film, you watch Cinderella get her hopes up and get them dashed multiple times before finally getting her happily ever after. The whole story centers around the fact that you want Cinderella to be happy because she deserves to be happy. This time around, it's just more wacky because why not? It really does feel like a film made by people who weren't all that interested in anything other than a film people would have fun watching. And honestly, I would make a case for this being the best Disney film ever made. Are there films with better writing? Of course. Are there films with better themes? Absolutely. Are there smarter or healthier films out there? Yes. But none of that compares to the sheer unbridled joy I experienced watching this movie. It's a simple movie in terms of stakes, but I was hooked on every single moment watching this because just like the first one, I just want Cinderella to have what makes her happy because it's what she deserves. It takes the simple joys of the first movie and makes it the central story, amping up everything with sheer unbridled ridiculousness. Watching this movie, I had so much straight up fun and laughed until my sides hurt on many occasions, and not a lot of animated movies can do that, especially these days. Despite only being made in 2007, it really shows just how worse animation has gotten in only a decade. Stories are less satisfying because they're so packed to the brim with twists and mysteries and subversions. They succumb to world builder's disease so frequently, and they're so fucking desperate to be seen as smart and be considered important and meaningful. And funnily enough, A Twist in Time does have a really good story in here about an abuse victim getting out of that cycle, and the stakes are kept personal so that forgiveness at the end is a lot more meaningful, especially when she makes things right. But it wouldn't be as impactful as it is if the film wasn't such a laugh riot from start to finish. Honestly, watching this film and just laughing my ass off completely and utterly really made me realize just how tired I am of all of this. I'm so tired of being angry and not being able to enjoy something without constantly worrying that's gonna vanish up its own ass. The Disney project as a whole was a much needed reprieve from the stagnant fucking mire of modern animation, but this one, this Disney sequel from 2007, that had no right to be as fun as it was, really just made the exhaustion set in. And I know I'm not alone in this feeling. The ratings for these shows and reception in general has always been tepid, despite how much fandom culture loses their mind over this stuff. These shows are proven to wither and fucking die. I've been grousing about this for a long time, and it's not like I enjoy doing that. People who paint me as an outrage merchant like to imagine that I just enjoy hating things and ruining the enjoyment for other people, but that's such a laughably, well, Disney villain caricature that I can't imagine anyone sincerely believing it for reasons other than reassuring themselves that their favorite things aren't actually problematic. You think I like coming up here every week to tell you guys another cartoon vanished up its own ass? I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. I hate every goddamn fucking second of it. But I keep doing it because they keep vanishing up their own fucking ass and just keep getting worse and worse. Just watch A Twist in Time and relearn what having fun means. It's fucking amazing, gay princesses, and we're done. We're done. We're done. Good night.